Picture this. A woman stands in the pouring rain, clutching a 2-day-old baby against her chest. Her hospital pajamas are soaked through. Her C-section stitches are bleeding. In her pocket, she has exactly $500 and a broken heart. 30 minutes ago, her husband looked her in the eye and said 5 words that would haunt him forever. "Get out, we are done." He watched her walk into the storm with his own newborn son, then closed the door and poured himself a drink. His mistress was already wearing the wife's bathrobe. He thought he was throwing away garbage. He thought he was trading up. He thought he would never see her again. But here is what he did not know. In exactly 24 hours, that shivering homeless woman would become the sole owner of a $1.4 billion empire. The same empire that owns the company where he works. The same building where he sits in his little cubicle, dreaming of promotions he will never get. He kicked out his wife. He woke up with his boss, and she was just getting started. This is not a fairy tale. This is a revenge story. And by the end, you will understand why the people who underestimate you are making the biggest mistake of their lives. Stay with me. This one is going to hurt in the best way possible. Before we dive in, let me tell you why this story matters. This is not just entertainment. This is a blueprint, a reminder that your lowest moment does not define your future, that the people who throw you away often hand you the keys to everything they ever wanted, and that dignity, patience, and strategic thinking will always defeat cruelty and arrogance. If you have ever been underestimated, dismissed, or discarded by someone who thought you were worthless, this story is for you. Now let us begin. 3 months from now, I would stand in a boardroom worth more than his entire life. I would watch the color drain from his face as he realized the woman he threw away had become the woman who owned everything he ever wanted. But tonight I was bleeding through my C-section stitches, holding my 2-day-old son, watching my husband hand me $500 and tell me to disappear. He thought he was throwing away garbage. He had no idea he was throwing away his future. My name is Brooklyn Hayes, and this is the story of how I went from homeless to billionaire in 90 days, and how I made the man who betrayed me pay for every single tear. The rain in Seattle did not just fall that Tuesday evening. It hammered against the windshield of the Uber like gravel thrown against tin. I sat in the back seat, my body still swollen from pregnancy, my C-section incision pulling tight with every bump in the road. The pain was constant, a dull fire across my lower abdomen that flared with each pothole. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I had called Garrett 3 times from the hospital lobby. No answer. I had texted him that I was coming home with baby Noah. No reply. My husband of 4 years, the Piet who had promised to love and cherish me until death do us part, could not be bothered to respond to a single message on the day I brought his son home. The Uber pulled up to our rented bungalow on Maple Street. I thanked the driver and carefully lifted Noah's car seat, wincing as the movement sent a sharp jolt through my stitches. The rain soaked through my thin hospital pajamas within seconds. I pushed the front door open with my hip, shaking water from my hair. "Garrett," I called out, my voice raspy from exhaustion. "Garrett, we are home." He slept the whole way. The living room was strangely uncluttered. That was the first thing I noticed. The pile of mail that usually sat on the console table was gone. The throw blankets were folded with military precision. My grandmother's quilt, the one she had made by hand before she passed, was missing from the couch. And then I saw the family photos on the wall. 3 of them had been rearranged. I looked closer and felt my blood run cold. I had been cropped out of each one. Something was very wrong. I walked further into the house, still carrying Noah in his car seat. That is when I saw the suitcases. 3 large black suitcases stood near the hallway like soldiers waiting for orders. My suitcases. Garrett was sitting in his leather recliner, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the blank television screen, wearing his good suit. The Navy Brooks Brothers one he usually saved for important presentations at Wellington Logistics. "Garrett," I whispered, a cold flush rising on my neck. "Are we going somewhere?" He finally turned. His face was unreadable, a mask of smooth indifference that was more terrifying than anger would have been. "Sit down, Brooklyn," he said, his voice calm in a way that made my skin crawl. "I just had surgery," I replied. "I have been sitting for an hour in an Uber. Why are you dressed up?" He stood slowly, took a sip of his drink, and set the glass down on a coaster with deliberate precision. "Because I have somewhere to be," Garrett said, "and you do not live here anymore." I blinked, certain I had misheard him. I looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully in his carrier, and then back at my husband. "That is funny," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "That is really funny, Garrett. Is this a postpartum prank? Did your idiot brother put you up to this?" A female voice answered from the kitchen. "It is not a joke, Brooklyn." I froze. The kitchen door swung open and a woman walked out. I knew her. Megan Cross. She was the paralegal at a firm that did contract work with Garrett's company. She was 26, ambitious, and currently wearing my dead grandmother's robe, the robe I had received as a gift at my bridal shower. Something inside me cracked. "Garrett," I said slowly, "what is she doing here?" "She lives here now," Garrett replied, walking over to stand beside Megan. He did not put his arm around her. He just stood there, presenting a united front. "I have been trying to find the right time to tell you, but there never is a right time. I am not happy, Brooklyn. I have not been happy for a long time." The words hit me like physical blows. "You are leaving me?" I gasped, clutching the handle of the car seat so hard my knuckles turned white. "Now, I just gave birth to your son. I am still bleeding from the surgery." "That is exactly why," Garrett snapped, his calm facade cracking for just a second. "Look at you, Brooklyn. You are a mess. You have no ambition. You are content living paycheck to paycheck, clipping coupons for groceries. I am rising at Wellington Logistics. I need a partner who fits the image of a VP. Megan understands the corporate world. You just want to be a mom." I stared at him in disbelief. "I supported you while you got your MBA," I said, my voice rising. "I worked double shifts at the diner so you could study. I put my nursing degree on hold. I have emails, Garrett. I have bank statements showing every dollar I contributed to your student loans." Garrett checked his watch as if I were wasting his valuable time. "And I have a lawyer who costs $400 an hour," he said coldly. "How long can you afford to fight?" The answer hung between us, unspoken but deafening. I could not afford to fight at all. "This is not a debate, Brooklyn," Garrett continued. "I paid the rent on this place through the end of the month, but the landlord knows the lease is transferring to my name only starting tomorrow. You need to leave." Now, I looked at the rain still hammering against the windows. "It is pouring," I said, my voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go. My parents are gone. I have a newborn baby, Garrett, your son." Garrett glanced at Noah's car seat, his expression tightening with something that might have been guilt, but quickly hardened into indifference. "I will send you a check for child support once the lawyers draft the papers," he said. "But right now, I cannot have a crying baby here. I have a meeting with the regional director in the morning. I need sleep." He picked up the nearest suitcase, my suitcase, and dragged it to the front door, opening it to the storm outside. The wind howled, spraying rain into the hallway. "Garrett, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Just let me stay in the guest room for a week, just until I can find a place. Do not do this to Noah." Megan walked forward, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She crouched down, not to help, but to look me directly in the eye. "Do not make this pathetic, Brooklyn," she said. "Have some dignity. He does not want you." Garrett grabbed me by the arm, hauling me toward the door. The movement sent fire through my incision. "Get out, Brooklyn," he said, "before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He shoved the other two suitcases onto the porch. I stumbled backward, instinctively curling my body around Noah's car seat to protect him from the rain. "Here," Garrett said, tossing a thick envelope onto the wet concrete at my feet. "That is $500. Should get you a motel for a few nights." He looked at me one last time, and I searched his face for any trace of the man I had married, the man who had promised to love me forever, the man I had given up my dreams to support. There was nothing there, just cold, empty ambition. "Do not come back," he said. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the darkness. I stood alone on the porch, the rain instantly soaking through my clothes. Inside Noah's car seat, my 2-day-old son woke up and began to wail, and I realized with horrifying clarity that I had absolutely nowhere to go. I do not remember walking to the bus stop. The next hour existed only as fragments. Headlights cutting through the rain, the rhythmic sobbing of my newborn son, the weight of 3 soaking wet suitcases that I somehow managed to drag through the dark streets of Seattle. I sat on the metal bench under the flimsy plastic shelter, shivering so violently that my teeth chattered. My hospital pajamas were completely soaked through. The envelope of money, the $500 that was supposed to buy my silence and my disappearance, was stuffed into my bra. It was the only safe place I could think of. Noah screamed in his car seat beside me. I picked him up, pressing him against my chest, trying to shield him from the cold with my own body heat. But my body had no heat left to give. Shh, I whispered, rocking him gently. It is okay, baby. Mommy is here. Mommy is going to fix this. But I did not know how. I checked my phone. 14% battery. The cold was draining it faster than usual. I scrolled through my contacts, searching desperately for anyone who might help. My mother had passed away 2 years ago after a long battle with cancer. My father had left when I was a toddler. I did not even know his name, only that he was some kind of businessman who wanted nothing to do with us. My sister Dana. I tried her number first. The number you are trying to reach has been disconnected. My stomach dropped. Dana had changed her number 6 months ago after marrying a man who did not like me. He had systematically isolated her from the family. She never gave me the new one. I tried the local women's shelter next. A weary voice answered on the third ring. Seattle Women's Crisis Center. How can I help you? Hi, I said, my voice cracking. I need a place to stay tonight. I have a newborn baby and my husband just kicked us out and I do not have anywhere to go. There was a pause on the other end. I am so sorry, honey, the woman said, and I could hear genuine sympathy in her voice. We are at capacity tonight. The storm brought everyone in. We usually have openings after 8 in the morning. Can you try calling back then? I looked at Noah, who was still crying against my chest. I looked at the rain that showed no signs of stopping. Okay, I said quietly. Thank you. I hung up and sat there for a moment, fighting the urge to scream. Then I remembered Patricia Warren. We had been friends in nursing school before I dropped out to support Garrett's career. She had reached out a few times over the years, but Garrett had always found reasons why I should not see her. He said she was a bad influence. He said she was negative. He said her husband was creepy. Now I understood. He had been isolating me, cutting me off from everyone who might have supported me. I dialed Patricia's number. Hello, Patricia. It is Brooklyn Hayes. I know it has been a long time, but I really need help. Garrett kicked me out and I have nowhere to go, and I have the baby and it is raining and I need somewhere to stay tonight. Just one night. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Oh my God, Brooklyn, Patricia said. Of course you can stay here. Where are you? I will come get you right now. Hope. For the first time since the door slammed in my face, I felt hope. Then I heard a male voice in the background. Patricia's husband. Who is that? Is that Brooklyn? Tell her no. I am not getting involved in her drama. Tell her to call someone else. Patricia's voice changed. The warmth drained out of it. I am so sorry, she said quietly. I cannot. I am so sorry. Click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, watching the battery percentage drop from 12 to 11. The rain continued to fall. Noah continued to cry. My therapist had once told me something that I thought about often in the months that followed. She said that when something feels wrong in your home, trust your gut. Your subconscious has already cataloged 100 details your conscious mind missed. I should have listened. I should have seen the signs. The late nights at work, the password changes on his phone, the way he started criticizing everything I did, the way he made me feel small and worthless and dependent. But I had loved him, and love, I was learning, could blind you to the most obvious truths. I checked my banking app with trembling fingers. Balance? $67.43. Garrett had drained the joint savings account, the account that held the money I had saved from years of double shifts at the diner, the account that was supposed to be our emergency fund. He had left me with nothing. I sat there on that cold metal bench holding my crying son, and I considered my options. I could call 911. I could explain the situation. They would probably take me to a hospital. And then what? Child Protective Services would get involved. They would see a homeless mother with no income and a newborn baby. They might take Noah away from me. The thought was unbearable. I would rather die than lose my son. I was about to make a decision I would later describe as the lowest moment of my life. I was about to call 911 and surrender Noah to the authorities because I could not keep him safe on my own. I had already dialed 911 when a car pulled up in front of the bus stop. Not a bus, a sleek black town car with tinted windows. It looked out of place in this neighborhood, gleaming under the streetlights like something from another world. I tensed, pulling Noah closer to my chest. Every true crime podcast I had ever listened to flashed through my mind. Vulnerable woman, dark night, strange car. I was about to run when the rear window rolled down with a soft electric hum. "Mrs. Hayes?" a voice called out. "Brooklyn Hayes, maiden name Collins?" I froze. I had not used my maiden name in 4 years. "Who is asking?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The car door went open and a man stepped out. He did not seem to care about the rain. He was an older black gentleman, perhaps in his mid-60s, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit and holding a large umbrella. He walked toward me with a purposeful stride, his posture rigid and respectful. "My name is Walter Ashford," the man said, extending the umbrella to cover me and Noah. "I am the senior attorney for the estate of Dominic Vale. I have been looking for you for 3 days. I stared at him blankly. "Dominic Vale," I repeated. "The tech billionaire I do not understand." "I think you have the wrong person." "I do not," Walter said softly. He looked at my suitcases, then at my crying baby, and finally at the devastation on my face. His professional mask softened into what appeared to be genuine sympathy. "Dominic Vale passed away 3 days ago in Zurich. He was your father, Brooklyn." The world tilted. "My father?" I whispered. "No, my father was a deadbeat who left my mom before I was born. He was not a billionaire. He was a complicated man," Walter corrected gently. "He made many mistakes. Leaving your mother was the biggest one, but he kept tabs on you. He knew you married Garrett. He knew you were pregnant." Walter paused, looking toward the direction of the house I had just been kicked out of. "He also knew your husband was unsatisfactory." I let out a bitter, hysterical laugh that startled Noah and made him cry harder. "Unsatisfactory," I repeated. "That is one word for it." Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. Heavy cardstock. Embossed with gold lettering, "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "I understand you have no reason to trust me, so I will give you options. This card has 3 numbers on it. The first is my direct line. The second is the personal number of Judge Patricia Coleman of the King County Family Court. She can verify my identity and the legitimacy of this matter. The third is the Four Seasons downtown. There is a room reserved in your name. Paid for, no strings attached." He pressed the card into my hand. "You can go there, lock the door, and never speak to me again if you choose," Walter continued. "But if you would like to know why your biological father left you controlling interest in a $1.4 billion corporation, I will be in the lobby until midnight." He turned and walked back to the car. "Wait," I called out. "Why now? Why tonight? Why not a week ago or a month ago?" Walter paused at the car door. "The will was sealed until certain conditions were met," he said. "Your father wanted to ensure you were free of certain entanglements before you learned the truth. He was waiting for you to leave your husband on your own." Walter glanced at my suitcases on the wet pavement. "It appears Mr. Hayes made that decision for you." He got into the car and closed the door. The window rolled back up. I stood there in the rain, holding my son and a business card, watching the black town car drive away into the night. And for the first time since Garrett had kicked me out, I felt something other than despair. I felt curiosity. The Four Seasons in downtown Seattle was the kind of hotel I had only seen in movies. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Staff in crisp uniforms moved silently, their shoes clicking softly on the polished stone. The air smelled like fresh flowers and expensive perfume. I walked in wearing soaking wet hospital pajamas, carrying a crying newborn in a car seat and dragging 3 waterlogged suitcases behind me. I had never felt more out of place in my entire life. The woman at the front desk did not even blink. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, smiling warmly, "we have been expecting you. Your suite is ready." She handed me a key card and gestured to a bellhop who immediately took my suitcases. "There is a change of clothes waiting for you in the room," she continued, "and a pediatric nurse who can examine your son whenever you are ready. Is there anything else you need?" I stared at her, overwhelmed. Hot chocolate, I heard myself say. If that is not too much trouble. Of course, she replied, as if I had asked for the most normal thing in the world. I will have it sent up immediately. The presidential suite was larger than the entire bungalow I had shared with Garrett. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the Seattle skyline. A king-size bed dominated one room, while an elegant sitting area occupied another. Fresh flowers sat on every surface. A crib had been set up in the corner, complete with soft blankets and a mobile. Someone had prepared for my arrival. A young woman in medical scrubs was waiting in the sitting area. She introduced herself as a pediatric nurse from Seattle Children's Hospital and gently examined Noah while I changed into dry clothes. She checked his temperature, his reflexes, his breathing. He is perfect, she said, handing him back to me, healthy and strong. You are doing a wonderful job, Mama. I started crying. I could not help it. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in what felt like forever. The nurse left, and I was alone with my son in this impossibly luxurious suite. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of hot chocolate, brought by a room service attendant, along with a tray of pastries I had not requested but was too hungry to refuse. I sat on the velvet couch, feeding Noah a bottle and sipping my hot chocolate, and tried to make sense of what was happening. At 11:45, there was another knock. Come in, I called out. Walter Ashford entered, looking exactly as he had at the bus stop, dry now but still wearing the same charcoal suit. He carried a leather briefcase and a tablet computer. I trust you slept well, he said, though we both knew I had not slept at all. I appreciate all of this, I replied, gesturing at the room, but I need you to explain what is going on, from the beginning. Walter nodded and sat down across from me, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. Dominic Vale was born in Oakland, California in 1952, he began. His father was a truck driver who owned a single delivery truck. When his father died, Dominic was 23 years old. He turned that one truck into a fleet. The fleet became a logistics company. The logistics company became a conglomerate. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a photograph. It showed a black man in his 60s, distinguished and powerful, with eyes that looked hauntingly familiar. By the time of his death, Walter continued, Dominic Vale was worth approximately $1.4 billion. He owned real estate across 3 continents, technology patents, majority stakes in several transportation firms. Walter paused, and he owned the parent company of Wellington Logistics, the firm where your husband works. I felt the blood drain from my face. Wait, I said, Garrett works for a company that Dominic Vale owned? Dominic owned the holding company that owned the holding company that owned Wellington Logistics, Walter clarified. Through a structure designed for privacy, no one at Wellington knew who truly sat at the top of the chain, including your husband. I set down my hot chocolate, my hands suddenly unsteady. Why are you telling me this? Because as of 3 days ago, Walter said, you inherited everything. He pulled more documents from the briefcase. Legal papers covered in dense text and signatures. Dominic had 2 legitimate sons, Grant and Cameron Vale, Walter explained. They each received $50 million in shares in specific subsidiaries. But you, Brooklyn, you received the controlling interest in Vale Industries, 51% of the entire corporation, the family estate in the Cascade Mountains, and complete discretion over the future of the company. I stared at him. That does not make any sense, I said. He abandoned me. He abandoned my mother. Why would he leave me everything? Because he was a coward in love, but a genius in business, Walter replied. He knew that Grant and Cameron were not worthy successors. They are entitled and reckless. They would destroy everything he built within a decade. He watched you from a distance your entire life, Brooklyn. He saw how you sacrificed for your husband, how you worked and struggled and never complained. He believed you had inherited his determination, even if you did not know you had inherited anything at all. I looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully in my arms. You said certain conditions had to be met, I said slowly, before I could learn about the inheritance. What conditions? Walter hesitated. Your father was a paranoid man. He had investigators watching you for years. He knew about Garrett's affairs before you did. He knew the kind of man your husband truly was. Affairs? I repeated, my voice hollow. Plural? At least 3 that we documented, Walter confirmed. For Megan Cross, I felt sick. How long had I been blind? How many lies had I believed? Dominic wanted to tell you the truth years ago, Walter continued. I advised against it. A woman who learns she has a billionaire father will never know if her husband loves her or her money. Dominic wanted you to have a genuine marriage. He was waiting for you to leave Garrett on your own, or for Garrett to reveal his true nature. And Garrett revealed his true nature, I so said bitterly, by kicking me and his newborn son into the rain. Yes, Walter confirmed. The conditions of the will have been satisfied. The inheritance is yours. He handed me the tablet computer. But first, your father wanted you to see this. The screen showed a video. I pressed play. The face that appeared was the same one from the photograph. Dominic Vale. He looked frail, clearly filmed near the end of his illness, but his eyes were sharp and intense. Brooklyn, he said. His voice was deep, with a slight rasp. If you are watching this, I am gone. I have no excuse for my absence in your life. I built an empire, but I failed to build a family. I leave you my work, my burden, and my power. He leaned closer to the camera. But power must be wielded, not just held. You are married to a man named Garrett. My investigators tell me he is a small man with a big ego. If he is still by your side and treating you well, you may share this fortune with him. But if he has failed you, then use my legacy to crush him. Dominic's eyes seemed to bore into mine through the screen. Valerius blood does not suffer fools. Welcome to the game, my daughter. The video ended. I sat in silence for a long moment. So let me get this straight, I finally said. The man who abandoned me wants me to take over a billion-dollar company I know nothing about, and also destroy my husband, who apparently works for me now. That is an accurate summary, Walter confirmed. Does the minibar have whiskey? It has everything. I looked at the bottle of formula on the table, then back at Walter. I'm going to need several minutes, I said, and probably something stronger than hot chocolate. Walter stood. Take all the time you need, Mrs. Hayes. But know this, the board of directors at Vale Industries is meeting in 3 weeks to discuss succession. They expect the company to be divided up or sold. They do not know you exist. If you want to claim your inheritance, you must learn to play the game before they realize you are in it. He walked to the door, then paused. Your father was many things, Brooklyn. But he believed in you. The question is whether you believe in yourself. He left. I sat alone in the presidential suite of the Four Seasons, holding my newborn son, staring at a photograph of a man I had never known. A man who had just made me one of the wealthiest women in America. A man who had given me the power to destroy the husband who had thrown me away like garbage. And for the first time since that door slammed in my face, I stopped crying. I started planning. The next 3 weeks were the most intense of my life. I did not become a CEO overnight. That is not how the real world works. But I learned. Hour after hour, day after day, I learned. Walter arranged for experts to tutor me in corporate finance, management structure, and board governance. I read financial statements until my eyes burned. I studied organizational charts until I could recite them from memory. I learned the jargon that powerful men used to intimidate people like me. The first week, I barely left the hotel suite. Noah slept in his crib while I reviewed spreadsheets and quarterly reports. I took notes on everything. I asked questions that probably seemed stupid, but that no one was too proud to answer. By the second week, Walter introduced me to 2 people who would become essential allies. The first was Ruth Mitchell, the chief financial officer of Vale Industries. She was a black woman in her 50s who had grown up in rural Tennessee and worked her way through state college. She had no patience for nonsense, and even less patience for people who wasted her time. The second was Marcus Cole, head of security for the Vale family. He was a former Secret Service agent, built like a linebacker with a calm demeanor that belied his lethal training. He was assigned to protect me and Noah around the clock. Ruth was skeptical of me at first. I could not blame her. She had worked her entire career to reach her position, and here I was, a waitress who had inherited everything through an accident of birth. Convince me, Ruth said during our first meeting. Convince me you are not going to run this company into the ground. I cannot convince you of anything, I replied honestly. I do not know what I am doing yet, but I know how to learn. I know how to work harder than anyone expects. And I know what it feels like to be underestimated. I spent 4 years being told I was not good enough by a man who was not fit to shine my shoes. I am done being underestimated. Ruth studied me for a long moment. Fair enough, she said finally. Let us get to work. By the third week, I had undergone a transformation that went beyond education. A team of stylists gave me what they called an executive presence makeover. My hair was cut into a sharp professional style. My wardrobe was replaced with tailored suits and designer heels. I learned how to walk into a room like I owned it, because soon I would. I did not need to look like a model, I realized during one fitting session. I needed to look like someone who could fire you. Walter taught me something valuable during those weeks that I have never forgotten. He said that authority is 90% posture. Stand like you belong. Speak like you expect to be heard. The clothes and the hair and the shoes are just props. The performance is in the spine. I practiced in the mirror. I practiced in empty conference rooms. I practiced until my spine was steel. And through it all, I thought about Garrett. Walter had shown me the files his investigators had compiled. 3 affairs before Megan Cross. Expense reports that bordered on embezzlement. A pattern of manipulation and control that I could now see with devastating clarity. But the worst discovery was yet to come. It happened during my second week of training. Walter arrived at the suite with an unusual expression on his face, something between anger and satisfaction. "We found something," he said, "something you need to see." He handed me a folder marked Garrett Hayes, Confidential. Inside were emails, dozens of them. Correspondence between Garrett and a man named Victor Langston, a senior member of the Vail Industries Board of Directors. The emails dated back 2 years. "Your husband has been in contact with Victor Langston since before your pregnancy," Walter explained. "Victor discovered your connection to Dominic Vail through a private investigator he hired to dig up dirt on his business rivals. He saw an opportunity." I read through the emails with growing horror. "Garrett knew," I whispered. "He knew about my father before I did." "Yes," Walter confirmed. "Victor told him everything. They had a plan. Garrett was supposed to keep you compliant and unaware, while Victor maneuvered to take control of the company after Dominic's death. They assumed you would never learn the truth, or that if you did, you would be too overwhelmed to fight." "But Garrett kicked me out," I said, confused. "If he knew about the inheritance, why would he get rid of me?" Walter shook his head grimly. "Garrett did not fully understand the trust structure. Victor told him that the inheritance was contingent on you remaining married for at least 1 year after Dominic's death. Garrett believed that by divorcing you before the will was executed, he would prevent you from inheriting. He thought he was cutting you off from the money. He was wrong. He was catastrophically wrong," Walter agreed. "The trust has no such provision. By kicking you out and filing for divorce before the will was read, Garrett established the date of separation as the night of the reign. That actually accelerated your inheritance. He gave up any potential claim to the money by his own actions." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. "So the man who tried to steal my inheritance," I said slowly, "actually handed it to me on a silver platter." "Poetic, is it not?" Walter replied. I looked at the emails again. Garrett's words, his casual cruelty, his calculations. He never loved me, I realized out loud. The words hurt more than I expected. He married me because he thought I might be useful someday. And when he thought I was not useful anymore, he threw me away. Walter did not try to comfort me with empty words. He simply nodded. "The question now," he said, "is what do you intend to do about it?" I thought about the woman I had been 3 weeks ago, bleeding on a bus stop bench, begging for shelter, ready to give up my son because I could not protect him. I thought about the woman I was becoming, the woman my father believed I could be. "I intend to destroy him," I said, "but not yet. First, I need to secure my position. First, I need to prove to the board that I deserve to be there. Then when Garrett least expects it, I will take everything from him. Just like he tried to take everything from me." Walter smiled. It was a thin, sharp expression. "Your father would be proud," he said. I looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully in his crib, unaware that his mother was planning a corporate takeover and a personal vendetta simultaneously. "My father was not a good man," I replied, "but maybe he raised a good daughter, eventually." The headquarters of Vail Industries was a fortress of glass and steel in downtown Seattle, looming over the city like a modern cathedral. I stood in the lobby on the morning of the board meeting, wearing a tailored ivory suit that cost more than 6 months of my old salary at the diner. My hair was perfect. My makeup was flawless. My spine was steel, but inside I was terrified. Ruth Mitchell stood beside me, holding a leather portfolio. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "Good," she replied. "Overconfidence is for fools. Let us go show them who owns this building." We took the private elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto an executive lobby decorated with abstract art and fresh flowers. The receptionist looked up, then quickly looked away. Word had spread through the company that something unusual was happening today. The boardroom was cavernous, a mahogany table stretched across the center, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. 8 board members were already seated. I recognized Victor Langston immediately from the photographs in my father's files. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired and patrician, with the smug expression of a man who had never been told no. He was about to learn. I walked in without waiting to be announced. Ruth followed. The conversation around the table died instantly. Victor looked up, his expression shifting from confusion to annoyance. "Excuse me," he said. "This is a private meeting. Who let you in?" I walked to the head of the table where my father's chair sat empty and sat down. "The deed to the building," I replied calmly. "I own it." The silence that followed was absolute. Victor laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. "This is absurd," he said, looking around at his fellow board members. "Security? Can someone please remove this woman?" No one moved. I pulled a document from Ruth's portfolio and slid it across the table. "My name is Brooklyn Vale," I announced. "Maiden name Collins. Dominic Vale was my biological father. 3 weeks ago, I inherited controlling interest in this company, 51% of all outstanding shares. These are my credentials. Verified by the estate attorneys and countersigned by Judge Patricia Coleman of the King County Family Court." Victor's face went pale, then red, then a peculiar shade of purple. "This is a joke," he sputtered. "Dominic never mentioned any daughter. This is obviously a fraud." I looked at him directly. "My father mentioned many things, Mr. Langston, including your recent correspondence with a man named Garrett Hayes, my estranged husband. I believe you were planning to help him keep me in the dark about my inheritance so you could acquire controlling interest in the company for yourself." The room went silent again. This time the other board members were staring at Victor. "I do not know what you are talking about," Victor said, but his voice had lost its conviction. "I have emails," I continued, "dated over 2 years. I have records of payments you made to private investigators. I have evidence of your conspiracy to defraud me of my birthright. I am not here to prosecute you today, Mr. Langston. I am here to give you a choice." I leaned forward. "You can resign from this board quietly and walk away with your reputation intact. Or you can fight me and I will destroy you so completely that your grandchildren will feel the shame." Victor stared at me. I stared back. I had learned something important during my 3 weeks of training. Bullies do not expect resistance. They expect fear, submission, capitulation. When you refuse to give them what they expect, they do not know what to do. Victor did not know what to do. "This is not over," he finally said, pushing back from the table. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." He stormed out of the boardroom. I turned to the remaining board members. "Does anyone else have objections to my presence?" I asked pleasantly. No one spoke. "Good," I said. "Then let us discuss the future of Vail Industries." The meeting lasted 4 hours. I did not pretend to have all the answers. I asked questions. I listened to the responses. I deferred to Ruth on financial matters and took notes on everything else. By the end, the board had voted unanimously to confirm me as majority shareholder and chair. It was not because they liked me or trusted me. It was because they feared what would happen if they opposed me. Fear was a useful tool. I was learning to wield it. That evening, I stood alone in my father's office, now my office, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Walter called with an update. "Congratulations," he said. "You survived your first board meeting." "Victor is not going to go away quietly," I replied. "No, he is not. We have already detected unusual activity on his accounts. He is preparing a counterattack." "Good," I said. "Let him come. I want him to feel confident before I take everything from him." "And Garrett?" I smiled, though Walter could not see it. Garrett is a small fish, I said, but I have not forgotten him. When the time is right, I will deal with him personally. Walter was silent for a moment. Your father underestimated you, he finally said. We all did. Yes, I agreed. And now everyone who doubted me is going to pay for that mistake. I should have known that happiness would not last. For 2 weeks after the board meeting, things seemed to be going well. I was learning the business. The stock price was stabilizing. Noah was healthy and growing. I had even started to feel something resembling hope. Then Garrett struck. Walter called me on a Thursday morning, his voice tight with controlled anger. We have a problem, he said. Garrett filed an emergency custody motion this morning. He is claiming you are mentally unstable, that you abandoned the marital home, and that your sudden wealth proves you were hiding assets during the marriage. My blood went cold. He threw me out, I said. There was a doorbell camera. I can prove exactly what happened. He removed the hard drive before you left. Walter replied grimly. There is no footage. I sank into my chair, feeling the walls close in around me. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Garrett's attorney was a woman named Catherine Blackwell, known throughout Seattle as the most aggressive divorce lawyer in the state. She had never lost a custody case. I arrived at the courthouse with my own legal team, confident that the truth would prevail. I had evidence. I had witnesses. I had the moral high ground. I was naive. Catherine Blackwell was brilliant and brutal. Ms. Hayes claims she was ejected from her home, Catherine said, addressing the judge. But she admits she left voluntarily. There was no police report filed, no hospital visit, no contemporaneous evidence of any abuse or mistreatment. I had just had surgery, I interjected. I was in shock. Catherine turned to me with a predatory smile. Convenient, she said. And now you have suddenly inherited $1 billion from a father you never mentioned during 4 years of marriage. Either you were hiding assets, Ms. Hayes, or you are fabricating this entire relationship for financial gain. That is not true, I protested. Then explain to the court, Catherine continued, why a devoted mother would spend the past 3 weeks in corporate board meetings instead of caring for her newborn child. Why she hired a full-time nanny. Why she prioritized a company over her own son. I opened my mouth to respond, but my attorney placed a hand on my arm. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents before her. This is a preliminary hearing, she announced. I am not prepared to make a final determination at this time. However, given the concerns raised about financial disclosure and maternal stability, I am ordering the following. Temporary joint custody, with the child residing primarily with the father pending a full psychological evaluation of the mother. Ms. Hayes will submit to the evaluation within 14 days and provide complete financial disclosure within 30 days. We will reconvene in 6 weeks. The gavel came down. I sat frozen in my seat, unable to believe what had just happened. Garrett walked past me on his way out of the courtroom. He paused just long enough to whisper in my ear, "Should have taken the $500, Brooklyn." I watched him leave with my attorney at my side. This is not over, she said. We will appeal. But for now, Garrett had won, and I had lost my son. That night, I sat alone in the Vale estate, surrounded by more luxury than I had ever imagined, and I had never felt more empty in my life. The nursery was silent. Noah's crib was empty. His toys were untouched. The mobile hung motionless above sheets that had been washed and folded by a staff that did not know what to say. I had everything, and I had nothing. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. The court filing was leaked to the media. Check the news. I turned on the television. Every channel was covering the story. Billionaire heiress, custody battle, shocking allegations. The narrative was already spinning out of control. Victor Langston had made his move. He was using Garrett as a weapon to destabilize me publicly while he maneuvered behind the scenes. I was being attacked from all sides, and I was running out of time. The next 2 weeks were the darkest of my life. It started with the lawsuit. Grant and Cameron Vale, my half-brothers, filed a challenge to the will on a Tuesday morning. Their claim was simple. I was a fraud. They alleged that my mother had been a con artist who seduced their father, that the DNA test proving my paternity had been falsified, and that I had no legitimate claim to the Vale inheritance. The media went wild. Vale Harris a fraud, one headline screamed. Mystery daughter may not be daughter at all, declared another. I was forced to submit to a new DNA test, an independent laboratory, supervised by court-appointed officials. The results would take 2 weeks. 2 weeks of uncertainty, 2 weeks of doubt, 2 weeks of watching my reputation crumble in real time. Then came the board meeting. Victor Langston had not resigned. Instead, he had spent the past month building a coalition against me. He had gathered evidence, he claimed, that I had been embezzling funds from Vail Industries, account transfers, shell companies, documents with my signature, all fabricated, of course, but convincing enough to create doubt. I move for a vote of no confidence, Victor announced to the board. This woman is either a thief or an imposter. Either way, she needs to be removed. I looked around the room at the faces I had come to trust. Ruth Mitchell, the CFO who had mentored me for weeks, the other board members who had seemed supportive. No one met my eyes. Ruth abstained from the vote. The motion passed. I was suspended pending investigation. I walked out of that boardroom with my head held high, but inside I was shattered. Ruth caught up with me in the hallway. I am sorry, she said quietly. Victor has leverage on me, something from my past. I could not vote against him. I understand, I replied, even though I did not. I thought we were on the same side. We are, Ruth insisted, but I have to protect myself too. I did not respond. I walked away. That night, I returned to the Vail estate to find Garrett standing in my driveway. He was not alone. A police officer stood beside him, and in the officer's hands was a court order. What is this? I demanded. Emergency temporary custody, Garrett said with a smile that made me want to scream. The judge granted it this afternoon. You have been accused of financial crimes. That makes you a flight risk. I am taking my son. Noah was in the house with his nanny. I could hear him crying through the open windows. You cannot do this, I said. I have not been charged with anything. Take it up with the court, Garrett replied. The officer is just here to ensure you do not interfere. I watched, helpless, as they went inside. I watched as they carried my son out. I watched as Garrett loaded Noah's car seat into his vehicle. I tried to run toward them, but Marcus Cole, my security guard, held me back. Do not give them a reason to arrest you, he said quietly. That is what they want. I stopped struggling. I stood there in the driveway of my billion-dollar estate and watched my ex-husband drive away with my child. Garrett rolled down his window as he passed. You should have taken the $500, Brooklyn, he called out. I warned you. The taillights disappeared into the darkness. I collapsed on the ground and screamed. Later that night, I sat in the empty nursery. The crib was gone. The toys were gone. Everything that reminded me of Noah was gone. I was alone, no baby, no board seat, no allies. Everyone I had trusted had abandoned me or betrayed me. I thought about giving up. I thought about walking away from it all. The money, the company, the revenge. None of it mattered without my son. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Check your father's private server. Password, Oakland Girl 1995, a friend. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I wiped my tears, stood up, and went to find a computer. If there was even a chance of getting my son back, I was going to take it. The private server was hidden in a room I had not known existed. Walter had mentioned it once, briefly, during my initial orientation. A secure facility in the basement of the estate where Dominic Vail kept his most sensitive files. I had assumed it was locked permanently, inaccessible without special clearance. The password worked. I spent the next 12 hours reading. What I found changed everything. The first folder contained surveillance footage, videos from hidden cameras in conference rooms and private offices. Grant and Cameron Vail meeting with Victor Langston, not after my father's death, but 6 months before. We need to move carefully, Victor said in one recording. Once the old man dies, we take control. The daughter is irrelevant. She does not know she exists. She will find out eventually, Grant replied. What do we do then? We make sure she is discredited before she can act, Victor answered. I have contacts who can fabricate whatever evidence we need. I watched 5 more videos. The conspiracy was clear and documented. The second folder contained financial records, detailed accounting of $12 million that Grant had embezzled from a subsidiary company 3 years ago. The theft had been blamed on a junior accountant named Thomas Mercer, who was currently serving time in a federal prison for crimes he did not commit. My half-brother had sent an innocent man to jail to cover his own theft. The third folder was labeled Garrett Hayes. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were more emails, more surveillance, more evidence of the plot to keep me ignorant and compliant. But there was something else, something I had not expected. An email from Victor Langston to Garrett, dated the night I was kicked out. It is done. She is gone. The inheritance will revert to the brothers as next of kin. Your payment will be processed within 30 days. Garrett had been paid, $30,000, transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. My husband had literally sold me. He had taken money to throw me and our newborn son into the rain. I sat back in my chair, feeling something cold and hard crystallize in my chest. I had thought I understood the depth of Garrett's betrayal. I had been wrong. This was not just cruelty. This was a transaction. He had calculated my worth in dollars and decided I was not worth keeping. I looked at the files spread out before me. Evidence of conspiracy, embezzlement, bribery, and fraud. Enough to destroy Victor Langston. Enough to send Grant and Cameron to prison. Enough to bury Garrett so deep he would never recover. But I could not do this alone. I needed allies. The next morning, I called Ruth Mitchell. I know Victor has leverage on you, I said when she answered. I know about the work retreat 7 years ago, the photographs. There was a long silence. How did you find out? Ruth finally asked. My father kept files on everyone, I replied. But here is what matters. Does your husband know? Another pause. He does now, Ruth said quietly. We worked through it. It was a mistake. I have moved past it. Then Victor has nothing, I said. The only power he has over you is your fear of exposure. If you are not afraid anymore, he cannot hurt you. Ruth did not respond immediately. What are you proposing? She finally asked. I am proposing that you help me take down Victor, Grant, Cameron, and Garrett. I said, all of them. I have evidence that will destroy their careers and probably send them to prison. But I need someone on the inside to verify the financial trails. I need you, Ruth. The silence stretched. I am in, Ruth said finally. Send me what you have. I will make sure the accounting is airtight. I hung up and immediately called Marcus Cole. I need you to find someone for me, I said. My sister Dana. I do not have her current number, but I know she divorced her husband 6 months ago. She sent me a message. She was the one who told me about the server. I will find her, Marcus confirmed. That afternoon, my phone rang. An unknown number, I answered. Brooklyn? It was Dana, my sister, the one who had disappeared, the one whose phone had been disconnected. Dana, I breathed. Where have you been? I am sorry I disappeared, she said. My ex-husband was a controlling psycho. Sound familiar? Unfortunately, I replied. I divorced him 6 months ago, Dana continued. He got the house. I got the satisfaction of keying his car. But I have been watching you. When I saw what was happening with Garrett, I had to do something. I still have access to some of Dad's old accounts. He set me up as a backup administrator years ago, in case something happened to him. You sent me the password. Yes, Dana confirmed, and I have more. I have been tracking Victor's communications. I know what he is planning next. He is going to hold a press conference tomorrow to announce the results of the board investigation. He is going to claim you embezzled $15 million in recommend criminal prosecution. I closed my eyes. Then we need to move faster than him, I said. Can you help me? Dana laughed. I have been waiting years for a chance to take down the people who hurt our family, she said. Tell me what you need. The DNA results came back 2 days later, 99.97% confirmation. I was Dominic Vale's biological daughter. There was no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for challenge. Grant and Cameron's lawsuit collapsed immediately, but that was just the beginning. I called an emergency board meeting for Friday morning. Victor Langston arrived looking smug, clearly expecting to deliver the final blow that would remove me permanently. He did not know what was coming. I walked into the boardroom with Ruth Mitchell on one side and a team of forensic accountants on the other. Good morning, everyone, I said pleasantly. Before we proceed with Mr. Langston's presentation, I have some new evidence to share. This is highly irregular, Victor protested. The agenda has already been set. The agenda has changed, I replied. I nodded to Ruth. She began distributing folders to each board member. What you are looking at, I said, is documented evidence of a conspiracy to defraud me of my inheritance and seize control of Vale Industries. The participants in this conspiracy include Mr. Victor Langston, Mr. Grant Vale, and Mr. Cameron Vale. Victor's face went white. Specifically, I continued, you will find surveillance footage of meetings held before my father's death in which Mr. Langston and my half-brothers discussed how to discredit me and divide the company among themselves. You will find financial records showing that Mr. Grant Vale embezzled $12 million from a subsidiary and blamed an innocent employee who is currently serving time for crimes he did not commit. And you will find correspondence between Mr. Langston and my strange husband, Garrett Hayes, proving that Mr. Hayes was paid $30,000 to remove me from my marital home and prevent me from learning about my inheritance. The room was absolutely silent. This is slander, Victor said, but his voice was shaking. I will sue you for defamation. You are welcome to try, I replied calmly, but I should mention that copies of this evidence have already been sent to the FBI, the SEC, and the Washington State Attorney General's office. Mr. Cole? Marcus stepped forward. Mr. Langston, he said, federal agents are waiting in the lobby to speak with you. I suggest you go peacefully. Victor looked around the room desperately. No one would meet his eyes. He stood slowly, his face gray with shock. This is not over, he said. Yes, it is, I replied. 2 security guards escorted him from the room. I turned to the remaining board members. Is there any objection to reinstating me as chair? I asked. The vote was unanimous. That afternoon, Grant and Cameron Vale turned themselves in to federal authorities. Their lawyers negotiated plea deals in exchange for testimony against Victor Langston. An innocent man named Thomas Mercer would be released from prison within the week. But my work was not finished. I still had to deal with Garrett. I called Ruth that evening. The custody hearing has been rescheduled, I said. The judge is reviewing the new evidence. She is going to reverse her previous ruling. That is excellent news, Ruth replied. It is, I agreed. But I need something else. I need to know where Garrett is going to be tomorrow morning. I have a plan. Ruth hesitated. What kind of plan? The kind that ends this, I said, permanently. Garrett chose to make his last stand on live television. I should not have been surprised. He had always craved attention, validation, the spotlight. Even now, with his schemes crumbling around him, he could not resist the opportunity to perform. He appeared on a morning news program with Noah on his lap. My son, used as a prop in his desperate attempt to control the narrative. I am not the villain here, Garrett declared to the cameras. Brooklyn Hayes abandoned her family for money. She prioritized a corporation over her own child, and now her own company is under criminal investigation. Is this the kind of mother who should have custody? The anchor, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, leaned forward with practiced concern. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Hayes. Do you have evidence to support them? Garrett smiled his most charming smile. I have something better, he said. I have her son, and I am not giving him back until she admits what she really is. A fraud. I watched the broadcast from the green room of the same television station. I had arrived 15 minutes earlier and spoken privately with the producer. I had evidence, I explained. Evidence that would make for compelling television. Evidence that the public deserved to see. The producer, smelling ratings gold, agreed to give me airtime. When Garrett finished his monologue, Jennifer Walsh looked directly into the camera. We have an unexpected guest joining us now, she announced. Brooklyn Hayes has arrived at the studio and would like to respond. Garrett's smile faltered. I walked onto the set and sat down across from him. Noah, my beautiful son, was asleep in his lap. He did not stir. Hello, Garrett, I said calmly. Brooklyn, he replied, recovering his composure. Come to admit defeat? I came to give you a choice, I said. Hand Noah to the studio assistant and walk away. No charges, no public humiliation. You just disappear. Start over somewhere else. Forget any of this ever happened. Garrett laughed. And why would I do that? He asked. I have leverage. I have your son. You are going to give me what I want. And what is that? Half, Garrett said. Half of everything. Half of the money, half of the company, half of your father's estate. You owe me, Brooklyn. I put up with you for 4 years. I deserve compensation. I nodded slowly as if considering his offer. Here is the problem with that, I said. You are not in a position to negotiate. You think you have leverage, but you do not. You have evidence. What are you talking about? I leaned forward. I know about the emails, Garrett. The ones between you and Victor Langston. The ones where you discussed keeping me in the dark about my inheritance. The ones that prove you knew about my father before you threw me into the rain. Garrett's face went pale. I know about the $30,000, I continued. The payment you received for getting rid of me. You did not kick me out because you were unhappy. You kicked me out because Victor told you I was about to inherit a fortune, and he paid you to prevent that from happening. That is insane, Garrett stammered. You have no proof. Actually, I do, I replied. I have bank records, account numbers, transaction dates. Everything is documented. I looked directly into the camera. So here is my question for you, Garrett. Live, on national television, in front of millions of viewers. I paused for effect. What is the password to your offshore account in the Cayman Islands? Garrett stopped breathing. Because my father knew it, I continued. He documented everything. And if you do not hand me my son in the next 30 seconds, I am going to read that password out loud. And every forensic accountant and federal investigator in the country will start digging. They will find the $30,000. They will find the tax evasion. They will find everything. The silence stretched. I watched Garrett's face as he calculated his options. He was not a smart man, but he was cunning enough to recognize a losing position. 20 seconds, Garrett, I said quietly. He looked at Noah. He looked at me. He looked at the cameras, recording every moment of his humiliation. Then slowly he stood up. He handed Noah to the studio assistant. This is not over, he muttered as he walked off set. Yes, it is, I called after him. And it was. The months that followed brought justice and closure. Garrett was arrested for tax evasion, conspiracy to defraud, and custodial interference. His offshore accounts were seized. His reputation was destroyed. He eventually accepted a plea deal that included 2 years in federal prison and permanent relinquishment of parental rights. Megan Cross, the woman who had worn my grandmother's robe, quietly moved to another state when the scandal broke. I never heard from her again. Victor Langston, Grant Vail, and Cameron Vail all faced criminal charges. The innocent man, Thomas Mercer, was released from prison and received a substantial settlement from the Vail Family Trust. I stood in my father's office 6 months after the television confrontation, holding Noah in my arms. He was growing so fast, already smiling, already reaching for things that caught his attention. Walter Ashford stood beside me, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Your father would be proud, he said. My father was not a good man, I replied. He abandoned me. He abandoned my mother. He built an empire but failed to build a family. Walter nodded. That is true, he agreed, but he recognized his failures at the end. He tried to make amends the only way he knew how, by giving me power, by giving you a choice, Walter corrected. What you did with that power was entirely up to you. He hoped you would use it wisely, and you did. I looked at Noah, who was reaching for a strand of my hair. I learned something through all of this, I said. Something important. What is that? That the people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage. They do not expect you to fight back. They do not expect you to be strong. And when you prove them wrong, they do not know what to do. Walter smiled. And what will you do now? Now, I said, I build something better. Not just a company, a legacy, something my son can be proud of. A package arrived that afternoon. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. I plugged it in, expecting another piece of evidence from my father's investigations. Instead, I found a video. Dominic Vail appeared on screen, filmed clearly in the final weeks of his life. He looked tired but peaceful. Brooklyn, he said, if you are watching this, you have survived. Good. Now the real test begins. I told you that your brothers each received $50 million in shares in specific subsidiaries. What I did not tell you is that those subsidiaries are failing. On purpose. Grant and Cameron do not know it, but their inheritance is designed to collapse within 5 years. I stared at the screen. They will come to you eventually, my father continued, asking for help, begging, and you will have a choice. Save them or let them fall. I leave that decision to you. He leaned closer to the camera. But know this, I gave you the empire not because you are my blood, but because you are the only one who earned it. The rest was always yours to build. The video ended. I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I looked at Noah, sleeping peacefully in his crib. "Mommy has work to do," I said softly. I thought about everything I had been through. The betrayal, the rain, the despair, the moments when I had wanted to give up. And I thought about what I had learned. They tried to bury me. They did not know I was a seed. The story ends here, but my life was just beginning. If you have ever felt thrown away, remember this. The people who underestimate you are giving you an advantage. They expect you to fail. They expect you to surrender. They expect you to disappear. Prove them wrong. And if you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice served cold. Until next time. And that is how a homeless mother became a billionaire, and how the man who threw her into the rain ended up begging for mercy he would never receive. But here is the real lesson. Brooklyn did not win because she inherited money. Money was just a tool. She won because she refused to stay broken. She won because she turned her pain into power and her tears into strategy. She won because the man who underestimated her gave her the one thing she needed most, a reason to fight. They tried to bury her. They did not know she was a seed. So if you are going through your own storm right now, if someone has made you feel worthless or disposable, remember this: your chapter is not over. The people who hurt you have not seen your final form. And revenge, served cold and calculated, tastes better than anything they can imagine. Now, I have a question for you. What would you have done in Brooklyn's position? Would you have taken the quiet settlement and walked away? Or would you have burned it all down like she did? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and the best responses might inspire our next story. And if this story hit different, if it made you feel something, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It takes half a second, but it tells the algorithm that stories like this deserve to be heard. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their storm will not last forever. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? We drop stories like these every week. Tales of betrayal, justice, and sweet, satisfying revenge. You do not want to miss what is coming next. I will see you in the next one.